the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Our help is in the name of the Lord, who made heaven and earth. Almighty God, we thank you for the amazing grace of this day. We thank you for this opportunity to reflect on your way and on your way and plan for human life. We ask you to inspire us with the right decisions and with the right responses to every question. Help us through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit to pray about, and help us to be enriched in your wisdom, so that we will better live out this vocation here on earth, and on the final day be able to meet with you face to face. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen. So Father Malachy is a friend of the house. I'll put it that way. He's a friend of YCP. He's a big brother to all of us. And he's someone we can always call on. I personally know him as a priest in this church. I've attended a few masses where he has, celebrated mass. Of course, we usually enjoy his homilies. Always mind-blowing. A lot of lessons taught, a lot of lessons taken away from his homily. So, though I don't know much about him personally, but I know a lot of us here do know who Father Malachy is. He was also part of us at the retreat we held at the monastery some few weeks ago. I wasn't at that program, but of course we got the feedback from feedbacks from people who attended in the group chat, how spiritually uplifting it was, how they spent, it was a quality period for everybody who attended that. Of course, while we put aside the refreshment and all that, but the spiritual aspect of it, and then the fact that a lot of people went to the monastery for the first time, and then, getting to see some of the, the way monastery life is, the kind of things that were, I know I saw lots of pictures, videos, people were amazed at, that sedentary life of, some of us Catholics. And I don't know if there's anything you want to tell us. Just a few words about yourself as well.
Well, the most important thing is I'm a Catholic priest in the midst of Catholics. Every other thing is secondary. So I'm from Soka Diocese in Enugu State. Maybe because of that, I will not have to do the miracle of changing wine into water. Thank you so much. I'm grateful for having me in your midst.
So we're going to read out the next. Thank you.
Okay, so the next is Mrs. May Omiyi, a beautiful mom in our midst.
Can we have it back on the screen? Just for your information, it is the very abridged version of the program. Some people's profile can be encyclopedic.
So we'll make it as brief as possible, but of course, loaded with enough information. So Mrs. May Omiyi is a public speaker on Christian education. She's a wife, a mother of 5, a former member of the parish pastoral council at Catholic Church of Transfiguration VGC, and she's also a church worker. After attending University of Ife, Mrs. May Omiyi started a career in education, which took her through certificate evaluation, curriculum development, school inspectorate, to the classroom where she taught English. I studied English in the university. I equally taught English as a copper. In many schools, including Acticon, Crowder Memorial Schools, and Elelenwa, that's in Port Harcourt. That's my state as well. And then King's College, Lagos. So all the years since 1986, Mrs. May has run a parallel vocation in Christian education, from her home, from catechism classes for children, to Bible study program for women everywhere she has lived, Warri and Port Harcourt, and of course Lagos, because you're here today. And the Netherlands, yes. Okay. The various groups and programs she started are still active and have in turn nurtured other groups. So please, can we give her a round of applause? Because it gives us an idea of the loaded information we're going to get from you today, looking at your profile.
All right, thank you very much, Vera, for that. So I'll quickly take the next one. Someone I know closely from the University. Thank you for being here, Anthony. So I'm going to read it out if you project it. Screen. You see, some people know how to abridge it. Remember that Mrs. Nemo was already abridged, right? For those who understand copyright, you know that it's very difficult to put some things in just very short time, right? So, Mr. Anthony Onyeoghane, that's Delta, I suppose. Yes, he's a lawyer. For some of you that are looking for how to package your profile, enterprise wide risk management expert. So you can even what you do, the same thing he does. But by just introducing himself like that, it's nobody has done my own. Wow. All right. Music record enterprise wide business. Please a round of applause. We are not going to sign up the promise. All right, thank you very much. And then last, let's have quickly joining us from UK. So when I introduce her, you open up her mic so that she can say something so we can hear her. I already mentioned that I have a couple of mentors, and this is a family that really nurtured me personally in Lagos while I was struggling, trying to be an entrepreneur. I am a serial one. So Mrs. Toyin Olaleye, founder of Tito Bakery, before she relocated to Nigeria, 2007 I think. She's a certified marriage and family life mentor. She loves to make a positive impact on the lives of children, young people, and families. Married to my mentor, serial tipster and strategist, Mr. Paul Olaleye, for 30 years. Together they are blessed with 5 beautiful daughters and 3 grandchildren. Please, with love, and love, let's welcome all the way from UK, Mrs. Toyin Olaleye. Malachy, we need to be able to say something to us. How is that?
Okay. Good morning, everybody. As I've been introduced, my name is Toyin Olaleye. And just like the priest said, the most important thing is that I'm Mrs. Toyin Olaleye, married to Paul Olaleye, with 5 daughters and 3 grandchildren. And I love to inspire young people, because when you catch them young, by the time they grow older, they will know that, yeah, they need to do the right thing all the time. So that's it. That's just it about me.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So we're ready, but let's give you a quick rundown of how the program is going to go, because the major means of the program is the discussion. All right. So we already aligned with a few of the speakers or the panelists that we are going to have a flow, starting from
the definition of abuse. What does it mean to you? What does it mean to me?
Yes, the definition of abuse. And then we'll move from there to that. The questions and discussions will focus on this flow. From there we move to
the kinds of abuse.
Kinds of abuse. Thank you, Vera. And from the kinds we move to
the signs.
The signs.
How do you know you're being abused by your partner?
And then lastly,
how to manage the situation.
Now there are a couple of questions that have been pre-generated. We're going to start with those. Some of those questions, as knowledgeable as the panelists are, there are some that you know that it's better someone in a position that is an authority in church, like the priest, is better from a priest's point of view. They already mentioned that. Father was saying, don't go ask me a question of where the priest supposed to answer. Father supposed to answer. It's all right. So we are even saying that, first and foremost, he's part of the faithful. So whichever way we can chip him, we chip him. But the ones who feel like, it's best that he answers. Fine. Then lastly, we may not be able to treat all the questions. So we're already planning that for some of the questions that we won't answer, they won't address, we'll reach out to them later and they can address them via written message or voice note, send them back to us and we share them in the group. I hope that's okay. for the questions we may not be able to address, but we're going to start with pre-generated questions, and later we are going to go into the audience questions that will come from Zoom or live from the audience. So with this, it is time to open up the discussion. And Vera.
Okay, so we'll take this question. What are the differences between separation, annulment, and divorce resulting from abuse in marriage?
Okay.
Can you hear me better now? Okay, so I said the first line of discussion will be, what are the differences between separation, annulment, and divorce resulting from abuse in marriage? I think Father should take that question.
Okay.
Separation, annulment, and... Okay. Thank you so much. I begin by thanking you once again for having me in your midst. Given the fact that I think there are multiple questions to be attended, so I will try to be as brisk as possible. When we talk of separation, first of all, we know that in Catholic marriage, there is what we call a marriage that is ratified, rantum, et tantum. And then there is a marriage that we call ratified and consummated. When a marriage is ratified, we are talking simply that before a recognized authority of the church, there has been exchange of consent between the marrying partners. But then after this exchange of consent, there is nothing like sexual knowledge between the two partners. So once this sexual knowledge in human way has not happened, we take it that this marriage is only ratified. Now, after the exchange of consent and then the sexual knowledge happens in a human way, the marriage is not only ratified, but is consummated. And at this point, the marriage that is ratified and consummated, it's no longer breakable by any human authority. And so, if problem surges in this kind of marriage, how does the church address it? That's where we begin to see these terms: separation, divorce, and annulment. Now, separation means that this marriage between the man and the woman is ratified, consummated, is valid. So no human person can really touch this marriage again. But because there is a presence, there is a factor, a circumstance that is present in this marriage, and which to an extent is life-threatening, then one has to find a way of securing the life of the partners involved, especially the party that is injured. And what does the church recommend in this particular situation? That since it is the fundamental requirement that husband and wife should live together, at this particular point, they have the permission not to live together. But that doesn't mean that the marriage has ended. They are still husband and wife, but the woman and the man can live separately. And this can happen under two conditions. I'm actually talking about Canon 1153. The first condition is that the couples or one of them can approach the local ordinary, that's the bishop, or through the assistance of the priest, to request for the permission to live a separate life. And then the bishop definitely will grant it. But if, for instance, waiting to meet the bishop will be very problematic, then that party has the permission of the church to live on her own or on his own to begin that separate life, pending what happens. Then as the separate life continues, then there might be discussions to know whether it is if it is possible to re-establish the communal life, that is living together. If it's possible, the church will always welcome it. If it's not possible, then in the interim, the partner can continue living. Whereas not trying to, remarry, because at that time the marriage is still recognized, it's still ongoing, it's just like a kind of security measure for the couple that have this kind of problem. So that is why it is technically called separation. Of course, I cannot be exhaustive because we don't have time. So the details of how to take care of the children in the moment of separation will always be taken care of, especially flowing from the civil court. Now, divorce on its own is not like a church term. It flows from the civil society. And why? Because for us Catholics, marriage between two partners is a sacrament. But then we know that not everybody maybe is a Catholic or a Christian. In which case, marriage is not only sacramental, it's also natural. And then in that natural institution, the church recognizes it. But then if you're a Christian or you're a Catholic and you don't follow maybe the specifications of the church, that's where we begin to talk about invalidity of marriage. But that doesn't happen outside those who are baptized, those who are subject to the church law. And so maybe when two partners, maybe they go to get married, maybe in the court and so on and so forth, then that may be the first aspect of it. Even though the church cannot recognize maybe this particular marriage happening between them, because as Christians definitely you have to follow the church law, yet they cannot begin to argue against what happened maybe in the natural institution, whether in the traditional marriage and so on and so forth. And so when you come to the marriage of Christians, Catholics, those who are bound by this, what we call the sacramental obligation, if those two partners decide to go to the civil court to maybe get a certificate of divorce, the church won't recognize that certificate of divorce as establishing a kind of a termination of marriage. Why? Because the civil court is incompetent. And that's why we don't talk about divorce. And so the civil court cannot be a custodian to the sacrament of the church. Matrimony is only a sacrament of the church. And that is why the church does not recognize divorce as truly testifying that maybe this bond is broken. Apart from it, the civil court views marriage as a contract. And that's why it can sever it at any moment in time. For the church, marriage is not just a contract, but a covenant. And that's why even if you go to the civil court, then you cannot be kind of talking of severing the marriage, because the civil court is incompetent to deal with that kind of covenant flowing from the sacrament and from the reception of baptism. And that is why, even though the church has no law against those who go to seek maybe for certificate of divorce, and maybe for sometimes, maybe if they are trying to seek for a declaration of nullity of marriage, maybe what has happened there could help. But fundamentally, the divorce does not serve as a basis for what the church does with regards to marriage. So that's the difference between separation and divorce. Divorce is related strictly to the civil court, whereas separation can happen also within the church circle or even outside the church circle. And then what we call annulment of marriage, technically, we call it declaration of nullity. Why? Because just like I have said, that no human authority has the power to say that this bond between these two baptized persons no longer exists. God said, whatever God has joined together, let no man put asunder. And so, in the declaration of nullity, or what we call annulment, it is not like the Pope comes or the Father comes or the Bishop comes and says, okay, this man and this woman, they are married, but now they cannot marry again. So we tell them, go and do not marry. No, that's not what the church does. What the church does is, there are certain conditions that lead to this partnership of whole life. Because if a man wants to marry a girl, one, it has to be a commitment of love, commitment in freedom, and there are some other requirements of the church. Now, it might happen that during the process of establishment of that bond, those requirements are not followed, or maybe one particular thing didn't go so well. Maybe it was discovered and neglected, maybe it wasn't discovered. Now, what happens in the declaration of nullity is that when problems begin to surge, then, and the couple bring this thing before the tribunal, or before the priest, or before the bishop, they will now go back to study the history of that marriage, to discover whether there was anything that went wrong within the course of trying to establish this marriage. And if it happens that there is something that didn't go so well, that is contrary to the provisions of the church, the church will now say that we now proclaim that this thing that happened we thought that was marriage was actually non-existence. And that is why we call it declaration of nullity. And once this is done, it means that that marriage never happened in the first instance because the fundamental principles were not obeyed. And at that point, the man and the woman will then be free to go and remarry. So whereas in separation they are not free to remarry, they continue to live separately while the bond persists. In the declaration of nullity, they have the freedom to go and remarry once the tribunal or the competent ecclesiastical authority establishes it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Father, for that insightful feedback. So now we have an idea of what separation, annulment, divorce, but we're still praying. We're still praying that nobody has any of those experiences in marriage anyway. We will get to questions. We will get to questions and answers. Okay, so Choma wants to ask a question.
So that we'll be able to take a couple of questions also.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Father, for the insight on the different kinds of issues that might come up in marriage. You said something about annulment. I want to know the fundamental of actually letting two people that. You said something about going back in the history of the marriage to see if anything that was supposed to have been done wasn't done. What could be that thing that wasn't done in the history of marriage that can lead to telling the two people to go their separate ways and that they can go and remarry?
So while you keep that in mind, let's also have probably that so you can address it too. It's okay, that's why it's interactive. And after that, we're still going to get to even what it abuse and all that. So Anthony, Madam, and Mrs. Toyin, let's take on.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Father, for that clarification. It really shed a lot of light on those three different areas or issues that can come up in marriage. My question is an abusive man or woman, physically abusive man or woman, isn't that enough grounds for annulment? I mean, someone who is, constantly doing, isn't that enough ground for annulment? Thank you.
Okay. And then we'll take a third comment, and then a third comment.
We'll be note your questions, but we'll have to start with the line of the experts. All right? We have lots of questions. So.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Yeah, thank you, Father, for enlightening us. Then my question is this. In terms of annulment, there are certain conditions in the church that can lead to annulment. We might want to know those conditions. Then secondly, how easy is it for annulment to happen in the Catholic Church? Because sometimes we used to hear that he has to go to Rome, but I don't know what it is now.
All right. Let's also know that the real thing we want to discuss is dealing with
Yes.
I know they're connected. So it's good. We know that they are connected. But there is a way we will start unfolding it, and then we might get into other areas without actually dealing with abuse, right? And that's why we say that this program is going to be serialized. It cannot be one program. So that it's good that while we know these ones, we'll touch more on the one that is dealing with abuse. So for people on the Zoom session, we're going to come to you, but let's get the ones that most important. 3 questions are okay for now. Please, Madam.
We'll give you room to ask. You ask. Just note it. Okay, so please, now we want to discuss what abuse is. Sincerely, some people don't even know what the meaning of abuse is. So we want Mrs. May. We'll give a few minutes to Mrs. May and also to Mr. Anthony to just give us an idea. What is abuse?
What abuse? I wouldn't want to. There are different types of abuse in marriage. I'll just stick to there's psychological, there's the physical, there's the emotional, and there's this emotional, psychological, physical abuse that you can suffer in a marriage. Basically, it is like violence, against the other party and wanting to control the other party, either through physical, emotional, or psychological, making the other person lose the dignity that has been given to them by God. I will just keep it as short as that. Yeah.
Okay, Anthony, you have anything to add to that?
Yes, just to mention that as a lawyer too, we also need to look at these things. I just need to give us the definition of abuse as defined by the United Nations. It will become very clear. It's called domestic violence or intimate partner violence. Intimate partner violence. And it can be defined as a pattern of behavior in any relationship that is used to gain or maintain power and control over an intimate partner. So there are different types of it: emotional, psychological, sexual, verbal, economic. Yes, there's economic abuse in marriage. Thank you.
You're supposed to bring money and you don't bring.
Thank you very much for dealing with that, the definition. So,
okay, we're going to come to the questions asked, right? But we wanted to hear from get a couple of views from the telephone. So we're also going to go straight to
the types.
No, yes, the types. Okay, the types.
The types.
I think that's next.
So, though they've already mentioned types, yeah. So let's now look at the signs.
Can we hear from
Mrs. Toyin?
Mrs. Toyin, please connect Mrs. Toyin. Signs. In case some of us are falling under economic, without knowing. Bring money, say there's no money. All right, let's hear from Mrs. Toyin. If it is, you have to share a few insights on signs as much you can detail on it. Alright, and then we'll get to the questions you already asked. We already have many people to get questions, but it's like those ones will take back seat because a lot of questions are coming from the audience already. So to hear from Mrs. Toyin on signs of abuse.
Some signs of abuse. Okay, let's just say they've treated the meaning of abuse, which is like to treat someone with cruelty, violence, and to exert power over somebody. So some signs is like somebody walks in, for instance, between husband and wife. Whoever is the abuser between the two of them is either the person is aggressive whenever they're talking to the person, or they try the time to put that person down, or they hit the person physically. And the other party who is being abused might be showing signs of withdrawal, like you don't want to communicate with your partner. Whenever the person is talking, you just keep quiet or you walk away. It's like a fight or flight. You either fight the person that is abused or you run away from the person. Fight or flight. You just take off. You withdraw. You don't want to talk to them. Another side is, not because of right in marriage, please deny the other person. That's a sign of an abuse. And someone mentioned economic. When it comes to financial abuse, the signs is that one of the signs you see is that in control of the money, or maybe the other person is a reckless spender. It depends. So it's like somebody is doing what they're not supposed to be doing in that relationship. So you see that it depends on one person, one party is spending more than the other party. So you see the signs that this our money is not growing. Somebody is abusing that. And psychologically, a part or the abuser might, look at the other party and say, "Oh, you are good for nothing. You're not, you're so big, and so,
But I will lose you again. Sorry about that, maybe network. But remember that some of the things can be later addressed and sent via message or voice notes. So, Madam, we're going to get back to you on a different question entirely. Maybe we'll get more information about that very question later via text or voice note. But let's get back to the questions that were already asked. Father, I don't know if you noted them.
I think the first question was about the things that could lead to declaration of nullity of marriage, if I remember correctly. Okay. There are many, and technically they are called grounds for nullity. So I can't even boast of having all of them off by heart, but I could just give you some sketchy examples. For instance, one of them, maybe, which may directly relate to what we are treating today, is maybe what the canonists try to provide for us in Canon 1095. So, and I will crave your indulgence to read the three of them out. Then I will make some few other comments so that we can move on. The following are incapable of contracting marriage: those who lack sufficient use of reason, those who suffer from a grave lack of discretion of judgment concerning the essential matrimonial rights and obligations to be mutually given and accepted, those who, because of causes of a psychological nature, are unable to assume the essential obligations of marriage. For instance, from these three terms, we can understand that basically, before you enter into that kind of permanent bond, you need to understand what you are entering into. And that's why specifically the church has said that for a man or a woman, for instance in the Catholic Church, to marry, the man must have completed at least 16 years of age, and then the woman at least 14 years of age. Of course, the Bishops' Conference can increase these years, but they cannot go below. And I think in Nigeria we do 18, 16. I can't remember. I think 18. Okay, perfect. So, but then you discover that sometimes age doesn't just go with that kind of maturity upstairs. So it might be that maybe when you started discussing with this man, you thought, okay, he has all this reason and so on and so forth. Or maybe he was giving some sketchy examples, or some maybe signs that are not decoded about not being able to assume the obligations, like taking care of kids, maintaining this relationship in a dignifying way, which may manifest in some aspect like this abuse we are talking of. And then maybe after marriage, kind of physical abuse or emotional abuse, it becomes recurrent. What do? The church will now begin to study the person, and that's where they begin, for instance, to involve even the psychological experts. They go to read about your psychological histories, or to know maybe in your lineage and so on and so forth, whether you have this trace of mental instability and so on and so forth. If, for instance, it is confirmed that this was existent before the marriage, not after the marriage, this must be antecedent to the marriage, then the church on that ground can declare that this marriage can no longer, did not happen in the first instance. So, apart from this aspect, there are many other aspects. For instance, if a man comes maybe to kidnap you and keep you in a place and threaten you that if you don't marry me, I'm going to kill you. And based on that fear, that wedding is conducted. And maybe after the marriage, you discover that as time goes on, you could not contain it. And then you happen to muster the courage to come and declare that initially this wasn't my idea to marry. I was kidnapped, or I was threatened. Or maybe your parents even threaten you. If you don't marry this man, then we won't take care of you again. And because you don't have any other person to take care of you, you decided to go into the marriage, not because you wanted the marriage, but because you have no other means of escape. So if maybe when problems begin to surge, and then you come up to let people know that initially you did not opt for this marriage, but you went to this marriage or other dress because your parents forced you and you hadn't any other option than to go into it, and so on and so forth, then the church will study it, because they know definitely at this point when somebody wants to kind of get this declaration of nullity, truths could begin to mix with lies. So that's why the church will invite testimonies and so on and so forth. And if, for instance, it is confirmed, then definitely the marriage will be declared to be null. There are many other grounds, but just like I've said, another thing may be what we may call grave error in quality of person, or maybe deceit that is maybe conscious and intended. Maybe you know, like a woman, you don't have womb again. You don't have the possibility of conceiving, and you hide it from your husband. And then maybe after the marriage, the man discovers, okay, that you had this problem and you decided to hide it so that the marriage could happen. Then that may be another ground. So there are multiple reasons, or maybe even in the exchange of consent, there is what we call maybe like a conscious exclusion. Like this man is saying, I'm going to wed you and to stay with you all my life. But as he was saying that, he didn't mean that. Maybe he has confided in a friend that I will just wed this girl because I want to be a party to the inheritance the father will leave for her. And then maybe after marriage, that your friend lets you know that this man doesn't love you. Look at the reason why he did it. And then from the testimony and from investigation, it's confirmed that actually when this man was kind of declaring his intention before you, that thing wasn't the reality. What he was saying was not coinciding with what he had in mind. Then the church on that ground can declare the marriage to be null. So there are many of them, but let me not just keep exposing so that others could come in. Yeah, there was the second question about whether physical abuse could be ground for nullity. Yeah, but it depends. Just like as I was reading the Canon 1095. If, for instance, you had a relationship with a man and then it ended in this marriage, maybe Catholic marriage, ratified and consummated. And then before then, there was no problem come before the marriage, but after the marriage. And that is where this provision of separation comes in to rescue the person from the undue difficulty he's suffering in living this kind of communal life. But then, based on that, work would then go back to begin to reflect on the life of the person, to see actually what was the person's life before, like marriage. Because it might be that this trait was there but was hidden. And so if through the assistance of experts, the psychologists or psychotherapists and so on and so forth, medical doctors, is established that this man had this problem from the origin, only that this problem was not discovered in time. Then based on that, you discover that that physical violence abuse is kind of a symptom of a very grave problem already there. And based on that, then the church could begin to go for the declaration of nullity of marriage. And then the final one is, it takes long time or something. That it doesn't actually take long time, but because you know it's a partnership of whole life and that people don't usually tell the truth, the church is not always quick to decide. So they have to listen to witnesses also. And it happens in stages. The first one happened, for instance, in the diocese. You approach your parish priest, and then the parish priest could, okay, after trying to see if the reconciliation is possible, if it's no longer possible, then they can then advise you to approach the tribunal judge and so on and so forth. And then definitely the petition will be welcomed. Depending on how fast each tribunal is, then that will determine how far maybe and then the cooperation of partners as well. Because you might do citation to a partner and you don't hear from him. Or maybe the girl comes and makes the presentation to the case. On the day he or she will present the witnesses, nobody appears to the court. Definitely, the tribunal judges will be handicapped. But then, because of maybe that little drag too, there is also another process now that you may not go through this ordinary process of going to look for witnesses also. And we call this one the brief process. But then there are conditions. Why I'm trying to avoid it is because we are talking specifically of abuse and not marriage. So I wouldn't want to spend the whole time explaining issues about marriage tribunal. Maybe on a future date we could just bring it out for marriage and so on and so forth. But then the brief process is like the bishop is the one as the first judge in the diocese who does it. And it happens when the cases are very clear that maybe this marriage did not happen in the first instance. One example would be like, for instance, the marriage certificate that is given at the end. For the marriage to be valid, there is what we call the canonical form. And the canonical form means that there must be a witness recognized by the church that receives the consent. beginning with the parish priest. As a matter of fact, under law, it's the parish priest who is supposed to receive the consent of the partners who are wedding. And if the parish priest does not receive it or does not give his authorization to another person, by that fact, that marriage should be invalid, for instance. So it's not a question of, okay, I call my priest friend to come from the east to come and wed me. If the parish priest does not authorize him and he receives the consent, according to the church law, that marriage is invalid. So if, for instance, there is a document that establishes, but don't be bothered about that, because the church has also mechanism of what we call convalidation, which happens with a marriage that happened that wasn't taken to be valid. So there is a way to remedy it. So, but because we are not discussing marriage today, I wouldn't go into those details. So, but what I'm saying, for instance, the document already is there proving that this marriage did not happen. Then there is no need going maybe to wait and begin to call witnesses to come, because you already have the proof before you. And so the bishop on his authority could stand there in his office and then declare that marriage null. That's what we call the brief process. So what normally happens is that once you have that kind of challenge and you feel like, you sense like, okay, maybe there is something that didn't go well, it's advisable you approach the priest. The priest will then study it and know what particular approach or what process is the most advisable to take at that particular point. So I think this, in a brief way, tries to answer the questions we have put forward for now.
Thank you very much, Father.
All right. We will take the last one from the room. Right? But please, this is broad. So let's try and focus on dealing with abuse, because we have the marriage aspect, which is a different discussion. So we will have other series of this program, right? Before we go to the panelists on the key area of dealing with abuse, because a lot of incidents sprang up. Let's take the last question that's related to the very conversation on abuse.
Yeah, thank you very much to the panelists, and thank you for your insightful conversation so far. So my question is, I mean, I wouldn't want to restrict it to only abuse, right? Because it's a confusion which I believe the panel of judges would be able to shed clarity on. So, for example, I know you talked about dissolution of marriage from, dissolution of marriage from the court, right? Then you talked about the declaration of nullity, which is from the church. Okay, so what happens where the court has gone ahead to give a dissolution of marriage, and perhaps the church has not recognized that, and the couples come to, and perhaps the father invites the couple, to the church, and the couples are saying, no, the court has already divorced both of us. So is there like a waiver from the church as regards that, or how does the church remedy that sort of situation? Then that's one. Then secondly is, so when there is a declaration of nullity in marriage, the court always gives declaration about how the assets, property should be shared between both parties. So is there any sort of arrangement for that in the Catholic Church? And if there is, how is that implemented? Thank you, and sorry for going against it.
Just like I've said, with regards to divorce, maybe when a couple has secured a certificate of divorce, of course, like I've said, that the church doesn't depend on that certificate to judge the marriage that is already celebrated or that is already taken to be valid in the church. So the essence of recognition from the church, if for instance the church were to recognize it, the implication is that the couple now can go ahead to remarry. So what the church is trying to say is that based on these judgments of the civil court, we do not recognize it, which means you cannot go ahead to marry. So if the couple decide to go ahead and marry, it means that such marriage that is celebrated is invalid as far as the church is concerned, and therefore they cannot participate in the sacraments. So, but the church has no place to come and tell you now, because you have secured these certificates of divorce against our admonition, therefore this or that. It doesn't even mean that when you come into the church will pursue you away. But what it means is that whatever marriage you celebrate, the church won't recognize it based on that certificate of divorce. Then with regards to what you're saying, we call it the mere civil effects of marriage. So of course as Christians, we are also citizens. So we do not only abide by the laws of the church, but we also abide by the laws of the state. And there are demarcations, there are competencies. So the church has already assigned the competence of determining rights to the civil courts. So when they decide that this is what the woman is to do, or what is the man is supposed to do with regards to taking care of the children, normally the church does not intervene, because it is solely the competence of the civil court or the state. But then it does happen that if, for instance, the church has what we call an accord with the state, because most countries have an accord with the Vatican See, just like Nigeria, and that's why we talk of papal legates or pope's representatives. Pope's representative means that this person is representing the pope and the church before the particular churches, that is the dioceses, and before the government of that nation. Now, some of the terms of that accord might be that the state now says, now, for you, the Catholic Church, also take the responsibility of deciding on these mere civil effects of marriage. Now, if the civil court or the state has relinquished that competence to the church, it's only in that condition that the church will now begin to adjudicate concerning what should be proper to each in the case of separation. But outside that, it's solely the competence of the civil court or the state.
Oh, fantastic.
Let's just bring everything home. You know, Father has spoken excellently well, so that we can lay this issue of marriage and face abuse. As a Nigerian, marriage can be contracted under 4 ways. Number 1, customary marriage. When you travel home to say you are going to do banco or whatever, you understand? That's one. Number 2, marriage under the act, which is the one you do at the registry. Number 3, Christian marriage, that is holy matrimony. Then number 4, Islamic marriage. What most of us don't realize is that all of these types of marriage have serious implications for a Christian. Because once you submit yourself to either one of these systems of marriage, the laws that govern that system of marriage automatically governs you and your relationship. So, for those of us who are here, who are already married, and you went to the village, and you came to Catholic Church, and you also did registry, you have submitted yourselves to 3 systems of laws. And under those systems of laws, honestly, either party or either spouse can bring an application under any of those systems of laws, and it will be binding on you. So the question to be asked is this: is it really necessary as a Catholic to be married in the church, and then you also go and do the traditional marriage, and then you also go to court? Is it necessary? Could it be necessary? Think about it deeply. Don't just shake your head. Because let me tell you the truth from experience. When it becomes extremely difficult as a Catholic, the civil law may just avail you. I'm just saying as it is. The civil law may just avail you. You know, why am I saying this? You see, Father talked about the conditions for annulments in the church. They are real. But for most of us who are here, enlightened people, you may most likely not fall under any of those conditions. Defect of form, defect of will, defect of contract. You may not fall under it because you already knew. Most times you were not deceived, or you did not deceive anybody. So thinking that I will go and contract, let me just marry sharp because everybody is marrying. At least Father has said there's annulment. Most of those conditions will not avail you. And that's the truth. So, what is the solution? I think we will get the solution when we look at how we can solve abuse. Because there's a fundamental problem that leads to abuse in the first place. If we can solve all those problems, then all of these issues, legality, will not come into play at all. And then to answer the question of how do you recognize abuse? There is one way of recognizing abuse. Any type of abuse, be it psychological, emotional, physical, violence. economic one. There's only one way that you can use in identifying all types of abuse. Do you know what it is? Lack of respect. Do you know why? Abuse attacks the dignity of the human person. And what that dignity is, that they are taking away the fact, what God has put in you. We call it inalienable rights in law. That is, nobody gave it to you. By the mere fact that you are a human being, created in the image and likeness of God, you have human dignity. That human dignity means that you deserve respect. Once that respect is being attacked in any way, abuse has started. That is one way you can identify abuse, any form of abuse. Lack of respect. They are taking away your dignity. And once that lack of respect is being attacked, what will happen? Unhappiness. So if you look at a couple and you see that one of them is unhappy, look further, you will see that there is some form of disrespect that is going on. That person's dignity as a human child made by God is being attacked. It could be in any forms, verbal, emotional. So just look out for, is the man respecting the woman? Or is the woman respecting the man? If there is no respect, look deeply, there is abuse going on. Thank you.
Wow, that was in fact.
People was Instagram saying content. This is content. It's the round of applause for
Okay, so we want to address one of the questions that have been raised prior to here. And then the questions will be directed to Mrs. May Omiyi and Mrs. Toyin. But we would want Mrs. Toyin to first of all give us a talk on, a lot of people, a lot of victims of abuse find it particularly daunting. When we say daunting, they find it very, very difficult to speak about their experiences of abuse, because they feel like society would frown at them, family members will laugh at them, people will think that probably they are the problem why these abuses are happening, and hence they tend to keep quiet. Perfect example, the lady that was recently allegedly killed by her husband, the gospel singer. We got feedbacks from family, from friends, that they knew she was being abused. A lot of people actually appealed to her to speak up, to speak out, to report the case, but she chose to keep silent because her words, what do people say? How would they look at her, a minister of the gospel, walking out of her marriage, divorcing her husband or separating herself from her husband? That is a big problem. So our question here is, what is your advice to people who are scared of speaking out, people who remain in that situation because they are scared of what people out there would say? So Mrs. Toyin, please, if you can give us your perspective to this.
The first thing is, anyone who is afraid to speak up is afraid of what people will say about her. The stigma the society has placed on somebody like that. If you speak up to say, oh, my husband is beating me or my wife is beating me, so people will be like, you have to, take it easy. Even some mothers tell their daughters, when their daughters say, oh, my husband is not treating me well, they will say, oh, your father, I've been living with your father for 20 years. And that's how a woman should be. Just stay there and manage. There's no need to manage. And the girl cannot even go back home. Because they say, the moment you left this house, your room has been given to somebody else. You can't come back. People don't listen to them. So that fear of what will people say, will they believe me, will make them not to speak out. And also, for a lot of women, when they're dating, they see the potential in that man. But the fact is, they are dating the reality. But they want to marry the potential and say, oh, this person, is going to be this, is going to be that. Like in case of Osinachi, she kept saying her husband would change. Her husband would change. And she kept telling people, but she was just telling them not to let them go and help her tell other people speak up. She just wanted them to know. But the truth is, our culture is mostly responsible for the reason why people don't speak out. Culture, stigma, and fear. Fear of the unknown. If I speak out and then if the only one doing everything, because you as a woman, you don't even have your own means of livelihood. So you'll be afraid to speak up. You'll be managing it. And also, women, I'm talking of women now because I'm talking about women who have been abused in their marriages. They tell their friends laugh at them. So they keep quiet, they live, they just live in isolation. But when you look at them, you know that they're not okay. So our culture, stigma, and fear of the unknown, and the expectation that this man will change or this woman will change. This expectation of somebody is going to change is unrealistic.
Thank you. So let's hear from Mrs. May, and after that, we'll also hear from the side of the men.
Okay.
Men also suffer abuse.
They do. Okay, so the question is, why do they stay? Or was that the question? Why? Sorry. Oh, why do they keep quiet? Why are they silent?
People are afraid.
Yes.
People who speak up who have been abused in marriage.
Yes.
Share your thoughts. What can they do?
Oh, okay. Solutions to, oh, well, basically, they just have to, as much as possible, be very truthful to themselves. That's so important. And I would like to also, I'm not judging them, but I would also want to say that there's something, I would say pride. Pride, because I've come across a lot of women who suffer from abuse. And that question of not wanting the other person to know is because you don't want to be laughed at. But you have to face the truth. And if you don't, at the end of the day, you could lose your life as a result. Why don't you want to be laughed at? Why do you do? Because you don't have humility. If you have humility, you would, really want to be laughed at. But so that the truth can come out as much as possible. So I would say, basically, don't sit there and take it. The person who is committing the abuse needs to be held to accountability. The person has to, you must hold the person responsible for what they're doing. That's so important, not to hide. The scripture says, where there is evil, you reveal evil as much as possible. So it's evil. What's happening to you is evil. And you are condoning the sin. And in fact, I read in the canon, which I found it a little bit, that if, for instance, you have a marriage and there's adultery in the marriage, and you withhold, conjugal rights from the person. But if it is known, for instance, that you tolerated that adultery, then you don't have a right anymore to protest. So as much as possible, don't condone these things. Open up. Let somebody know what you're going through. Don't be ashamed. Don't be afraid. Be truthful to yourself and to the person. Because like we say, if you love your husband, for instance, and he's being abusive, think about where he's going to spend eternity. Think about his salvation. If he continues the way he's going, he will end up, in perdition. So, as much as possible, if he's held to accountability early enough, then we might not get to the stage where life is being threatened. So, I think that once abuse has happened, even if it's only once, shout out. Shout out as much as possible. Then that person starts starts taking responsibility for his actions. And when he does, you might be able to curb it if he himself takes responsibility. So I would give that as a very short answer. It could be longer than that. Thank you.
Okay, but just before you.
Yes.
Shout out where?
Okay. Okay. All right. Fine.
On social media.
Yeah. So. Yes, yes, that's very, very important. I think because, okay, I know that a lot of women, you don't want to expose your husband, you don't want to, make him, out of love of him, for instance, you don't want to make him you don't want to ridicule him and all that. So you must look for good counsel. I would start with that. Good counsel. Not somebody who will tell you, just stay there and suffer it, or you can, somebody to give you good advice. And that person has to be somebody who is Christ-like, who can talk from the position of what would Jesus do to such a person, or what would Jesus do in that situation. Because I know, people say, forgive and forgive, and then you start feeling guilty, or when you want to deal with the person, they will say, you're not forgiving. No. If there is sin, that sin has to be repented of, and there's punishment for sin, and that person needs to be punished for their actions as much as possible. So your first, for me, the confessional. For instance, I know that the priest does not have probably enough time, to listen, but you are sure to get good counsel from the parish priest. As Catholics now, I'm talking about as Catholics. So I would say at the confessional, because possibly you too could have provoked an action, you too could have been responsible maybe for, so maybe you go to confession, and in the course of, making your confession, get the priest to know what's going on. The priest might not have enough time, but he could. Then as well, the Pope actually instituted what we call the Family and Human Life Unit, which we are trying to establish here in this church. And those are the kind of things that it will deal with. So there's pastoral care. So I would say the church is your first point of call, with the priest at the confessional, and then later on, for people who counsel, good Christian counsel, and then we can take it up. And as it progresses, you might end up in the courts, or you might end up in the tribunal, or whatever. So that's what I would say. Thank you.
So what is that to also address this from the perspective of the men who are victims? Now, the reason why I wanted to say something, imagine the reaction that we got from the audience when Amobi mentioned that, people laugh because we think that men don't get abused. And that is why it's even worse for men, because they always see themselves as, we don't want people to see us as the weaker sex. They don't want people to, ridicule us. But the men now, we're supposed to be the man in the relationship. So how can you be the one being this man? So can you tell us?
Thank you so much. I have a friend. I've known him for, I can say, about 24 years. We were schoolmates. We went to school together. We even served together in the same place in Yobe State, somewhere in Nguru, very far off. But in school, Nguru, all those places, Gashua, desert land. We spent 5 years together in the university, and we did NYC together. Pure Catholic, like me. Everything about the church, And when we finished service, we started to get married, And we got married. I got married to my wife, and he got married to his wife. I got married to a fellow NFCSer, Catholic from the same university. By the way, madam, great Ife. Yeah, I actually went to Ife too. When you were your profile, you went to Ife. It's a good school. Back in the day, I don't know about now. So I got married to a fellow Catholic from Ife. We were all students together. He too got married to a fellow Catholic from Ife. We were all students together. Attended the same chapel, worshipped together, NYSC, at NFCS, Nigerian Fellow Catholic Students. So we got married, and then, of course, married life started. This was about a decade ago anyway. I think I'm about 12 years old in marriage now. So, but over time, things started unraveling in his marriage. And he started reaching out because we were very close. What is the issue? Okay, it started from when he lost his job. He was a banker and he lost his job. And from that moment, when he lost his job, things were not too okay, but they were still manageable. 3 years after he lost his job, he couldn't get another job. He was just trying to manage. Then things started unraveling. My friend, a man, started suffering from abuse from the hands of his wife, a Catholic, a Christian. We all went to school together, married in the church. So men do suffer abuse. What kind of abuse was he suffering? When we keep talking about dignity, people don't understand. See, a man has his dignity. There's a place for a man in a home. The fact that he cannot provide for his family because he lost his job did not warrant his wife to turn him into a rag in the house. Verbal abuse. We talk to him anyhow. We abuse him. You are useless. You can't do anything. I don't know why I got married to you. Leave this house. This thing went on for 5 years. As I speak to you today, last year, the woman asked him to leave the house. He has left the home, and she only said, you can only come and visit the children. As long as you're going to be able to provide for your children. Then, of course, there's the economic part of it where we understand that he could not provide. He's trying to. Okay, to make some mistakes down the way. You understand? As a man, he too did not have emotional. He was not emotionally present for his wife, especially when he lost his job. It started affecting him. He was almost depressed. So he didn't know how to emotionally connect again with the woman. And women are very emotional. So on that level, there was emotional abuse coming from him, and there was verbal, psychological abuse coming from the wife. So men suffer abuse. Statistics. Let's go to statistics. Statistics. 85% of all abuse is against women. This is from the United States of America. Is against women. So they bear the heavy brunt. 85% is against women. So let's not just miss it. Even though men suffer, but women suffer the most. Now the question as to how is that people don't speak out about abuse? It is simple. You do not know who you are. That is why you don't speak out. If you are somebody who recognizes that you are made in the image and likeness of God, I keep going back to dignity. You will shout, not only speak out, you will scream. What God has given to you, all these blessings, He made you the head of creation. He gave you the Holy Spirit. He gave you His flesh and blood in the Eucharist. All these spiritual gifts, everything God has given to you, one man want to subject it to nothing. And you sit down there and you don't scream. You don't know who you are. For Africans who don't speak out, it could be cultural, because from culture, we were trained, raised to just be there. Respect your husband. Is the husband respecting the wife? Is the husband respecting the wife? So people don't speak out because they don't know who they are. Pope Francis said something. The crisis of marriage stems from the crisis of faith. See, we'll get there, because this is what I'm talking about. It comes from only one place. Who are you in Christ? If you don't know, you will be abused, and you will abuse people, and you will think it's okay, you will think it's normal. So that's how you are pinpoint why people don't speak out. Who is this person? This one that doesn't know Jesus. How do you expect him to speak out? Maybe some will learn to speak out because they were very educated, they went to school, very enlightened. But even at that level, it takes them so much before they can muster the courage to speak out. Because they're looking at what will society say. What will people say? As a woman, I should be married, I should be my husband. Why should I leave? All of these things goes back to, who are you?
Thank you very much. Please, a round of applause for everyone. This is a very sensitive discussion. And then before we go to something very spiritual, we live in a part of the world where we easily see things on the spiritual. Not that spiritual is not good. For somebody who's looking for a job, instead of going to brush up his sleep with next skills, he's praying from money to that. So we're going to go to the spiritual angle of this, and we'll be running down a couple of questions that are all lumped together for Father. This one is coming to you. Prepare. They are coming. All right, but before then, we will take a video message. You know, we got a couple of videos, but we'll just take this one now because it's related to the discussion we just had. So can we have the video by Trish? Just like 3 minutes or thereabouts. Okay, while we are getting that video ready, please, is it possible to go to the Zoom? I think Zoom screen, people, there's a comment by Mrs. Toyin. We need someone from Faith Foundation to stay with you guys. Please, someone needs to stand with them so that whatever is coming can be passed to us quickly. So, okay, the video is ready.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mrs. Patricia Etete. I belong to the parish of the Catholic Church of the Transfiguration, VGC, and I have been married for 39 years. I've been asked to give my view on the topic of the day, which is dealing with abuse in marriage and understanding the Catholic Church's position. I would like to commend the YCP for organizing this seminar, as the topic of abuse in marriage is something that has been hidden for a very long time. We have panelists and speakers that will give you a better insight to the position of the Catholic Church on this topic, and I would therefore prefer to give my own view. I believe there are 3 major ways abuse can take place. It can be physical, it can be mental, it can be emotional. Whichever method is used is a no for me. With mental and emotional, I'm of the opinion that there is a possibility of reversing this trend if caught early, as therapy and discussions can assist the aggressor with the realization that what they are doing is abuse. People don't necessarily know this, and assisting them with the tools to de-escalate their attitude and behavior towards their partner can assist with change. Please note that abuse can be from either the husband or the wife. With physical abuse, unfortunately, my opinion is that once a spouse has hit the first time, they will continue to be physically abusive. Of course, they will apologize and promise they will never be physically abusive again. The tendency in 99% of cases is that this will continue and may lead to serious injury and sometimes death. Most people do not talk about being abused, physically, emotionally, mentally, as they are ashamed to speak out. To summarize my views, with regards to emotional and mental abuse, we should try mediation, counseling, and therapy. With physical abuse, it should never be tolerated, and the person being abused should seek help immediately. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, so we are going to go to Father now, and after that, we have a very, when it has become violent, when it's really dangerous, at what point is it advised to take a drastic step or to be walking away, right? Whatever it is, whichever the process. But before we address that, let's get to the spiritual aspect first. So there are 4 questions. We need to speak.
So, Father, these questions are serious questions. So that's why we're addressing them all to you, because it has, like you said, the spiritual angle to it. So it says the church has been inundated with calls over domestic violence in marriages where victims are sometimes asked to pray and commit everything to God, since the church frowns at divorce. But with recent violent cases that lead to terminal injuries and even death, what can you advise? What is the church's stand? Some of the people, we've also seen a case of where, okay, so there's something in the church that says, a teaching of the Catholic Church on permanence of marriage, which has made a lot of victims of domestic violence remain in abusive marriages. So they feel like, okay, because the church believes in you can't divorce, you can't end your marriage. So they keep, they stay on. Some of these victims attempt to even validate verbal and emotional abuse because the perpetrator is actually not being physical to them. But abuse is abuse, whether physical or emotional, and it can have damaging effects on both the victims and probably children if there are any in that relationship. So also, what is the church's stand? Can abuse be assumed to be a cross to bear for the sake of Christ? Can I ask that question again? Can domestic violence, abuse in whatever form, can it be assumed to be a cross to bear by the victim, all for the sake of Christ? Then also, there is the story of Saint Rita and Saint Monica. We all know their stories are Catholics, right? So both saints lived in abusive marriages. They faced abuses in their respective marriages. But another beautiful side is that they went on to become saints in the Catholic Church. So we see them as saints. So a lot of women also look up to Saint Monica and Saint Rita for guidance in how to live out their own vocations of marriage in holiness too. So there seems to be some kind of support from these women accepting, abuse, forgiving abuse by their spouses. Please, what advice? What advice?
He said, so can abuse now be assumed to be a cross to bear for the sake of Christ? Father, all these ones are lumped together into spiritual. Please help us make it practical so we can balance. Thank you, Father.
Okay, I think the question is about one thing, whether abuse is permissible by the church, in which case abuse no longer becomes abuse, but a kind of a way of achieving sanctity or sanctifying the marriage. First of all, when you hear about some of those statements online, the first question one should always ask is, which church teaches this? Because when people say the church, there is an attempt to generalize. As far as I know, I cannot claim to know exhaustively everything about the Catholic Church. But there has never been a time, maybe in the recent teachings of the church, that the church will want any of her members to see abuse as a way of gaining sanctification. And that's why even on that law, the church has carefully provided these measures. I take off maybe the aspect our brother was trying to explain about abuse relating to the dignity of human person. If, for instance, why this beak is created is that I'm to use this beak to write. Now, if I begin to use this biro to hit on this desk this way, I'm abusing this biro. What does it mean? I'm now using it contrary to the Creator's intention. And that's why what he says about, if you want to understand abuse, ask yourself, why did God create me? And then in the creation of man, there are two components. One, the physical, the other one, the spiritual. The physical, we talk about the biological. If someone sees you now, he says you resemble your father or your mother, maybe your nose, your eyes, and so on and so forth, or your grandparents. But then there is the other aspect that talks about the human person, the soul. Nobody knows about that one, how that one is infused. And it is from there that the church takes off to say that because of that, no human person can clearly lay claim to any other human person because it's God that puts the soul. And it's from there that we begin to understand even the cooperation between man and between God in peopling the earth that comes into effect, or that maybe we see in this sacrament of matrimony. And then you then ask, what is this sacrament of matrimony? Why is it called sacrament? It's called sacrament because it's a sign. You remember the aspect where people were asking Jesus, this woman married 7 husbands. in heaven, which of the husband or which of the men will now be the husband of the woman? And God was telling them that in the world to come, there will be no marriage. Why will there be no marriage? Because by that time, the role that marriage is playing must have given way to the reality. And so marriage is a way that we bear witness to the love of God in a perceptible way. And that is why St. Paul's writing will always say, husbands, love your wife as Christ loves his church. And then, why am I giving this analysis? I'm giving this analysis because once that relationship, that bond, comes in such a way that it is no longer a way of bearing testimony, it is gradually dovetailing into abuse. And church has carefully outlined what I might call 3 terms. 1 is difficulty. 2 is undue difficulty. And 3 is impossibility. Now, every marriage has its own challenges, no doubt. And that's why in the marriage, you cannot say that you escape from difficulty. We have 2 genders, male and female, but we have multiple personalities. And it's not genders that marry, but personalities as well. And so, let's say, for instance, you marry this young man, and then you enter, maybe as a woman, suddenly the man falls sick, and is not even able to perform, maybe has sexual obligations towards you as a woman. That's a difficulty that is not deniable. But you cannot leave that man at that particular point because it's not out of our own mistake. And it's not like he's hiding something. It's just something that has happened as part of his life. In that particular moment, you're experiencing difficulty. You cannot say because the man is not attending to you, he's abusing you emotionally, because he hasn't that power to do it at that particular point. And that is why the church can't even listen to you if you come up with that challenge. That is what we call difficult. But then we have undue difficulty. Let's say the man wakes up in the morning, you request for fee, and then the man decides to slap you, and so on and so forth. Why is it called undue? Undue because it is not necessary and it is avoidable. So in that particular case, you cannot say that if you are staying in that particular marriage, that you are bearing witness to the love, especially if it is something that has become continuous. And then third, the impossibility. Impossibility means that you cannot even exist, maybe when it is even coming to the aspect of maybe when it is becoming life-threatening. And so what does the church advise? The church doesn't say you are to meet only the Reverend Father or you are to meet this. That's why we have respect. Our sister talked about a kind of what is it called again? The family distinct union. Actually, in the process of marriage now, Pope Francis is telling us to establish what he calls the pastoral dimension. And this pastoral dimension should be the first stage, whereby we can freely go to discuss these things. Now, our sister was citing the example of St. Monica and Rita. When you hear that somebody is canonized as a saint in Catholic Church, it doesn't mean that everything the person did is canonizable and should be copied. Because every person has his own or her own particular challenges. Now, the emphasis about St. Monica and St. Rita is not, in fact, I don't know even the details of the abusive marriage. And the silent even in their history if it existed. So the church cannot tell anybody to begin to copy a saint that endured abusive marriage, simply because the church will be testifying against herself. And how is it a testimony against the church? Because the church lives primarily to promote human dignity, our brother has talked of. And so if the church should encourage you to begin to abuse yourself, to abuse your body, to allow another person to abuse you, then it becomes a testimony against oneself, which is inconsistent. But then the fact remains, because abuse is something that is communal and personal as well, there are no barometers to measure it. It's he who wears the shoes that knows where it pains. And so, once you begin to feel that this thing is no longer comfortable for you, your judgment may be right, it may be wrong, But you cannot know whether it is right or wrong unless you speak out. And so what is advisable is you meet relationship experts, meet your parish priest, meet anybody who can help. The person will be able to listen to you and then help you to discern what is the next right, what is the next step to take. But if anybody should get up any day to tell you that the church sees abuse in marriage as a way of carrying the cross, it's not true. The church can never support it because of what I'm telling you. It will be a testimony against the love that church herself is preaching.
Thank you, Father. Thank you very much. Thank you. All right, quickly. Some of you may not have been looking at all the comments in the Zoom, but I'll just read out a few. But Emmanuel has been watching all of them, so he's going to share them later in the group chat. But just a few from Mrs. Toyin. While some of the deliberations were going on, she mentioned your marriage sponsor should be intentionally selected. Yes, even when I'm anchoring weddings, we also let people know that sponsors are not people who sponsor financially. You understand? Your marriage sponsor should be intentionally selected. Surround yourself with couples in healthy marriages. Stay away from those who hate marriage. I always tell people that marriage is desirable, but not compulsory. So not like that. If you must marry someone who has moral values. There are other comments that he's wanting to share later in the group. So let me give you. Okay.
Trying to just be very practical, everything Father has said is 100% spot on. Summary: uncomfortability does not equal abuse.
Hold on first. By this time of the day, we are about to go for refreshment. So that English, you need to take it slow. Patrick is still ready. Okay, please, just speak that one again. Take it slowly. Go. The first one.
Uncomfortability
Hold it. It's processing. Next.
Does not equal abuse. You know what? You see, that my friend, the wife, that's the case. She believes that the uncomfortability she's experiencing as a result of the husband's lack of ability to provide for the family is enough ground for her to break the marriage. She has asked me severally. Okay. Yes. She has asked me severally that, do you mean I should continue to bear this until I die? Are you saying that God is saying that because I'm a Christian, I should just continue to bear this? He cannot do this, he cannot do that, he's not doing this, he's not doing that. Should I continue? There's something before me. Last year, Pope Francis said, November 6th, at about November 6th, that crisis in marriage is an opportunity, not a cause. What he's trying to say is this, that's what I said. You see, in marriage there will be discomfort, there will be difficulty. We must always divorce that, using the word intentionally, from abuse. Don't forget, abuse deals with your human dignity. Is somebody trying to take what God has given you freely from you? As what I said, Biro is meant to write. So we are not using it to write, are using it to hit the table. Is that the purpose? But if in using Biro to write, there is some difficulty, but the Biro is still writing, that's what Pope Francis is saying, that it's an opportunity for people to come back to Christ. And you see, I always say, everybody, whether you are married or not, you must have a spiritual director. In this life, you can't do without it. Your spiritual director can be a priest. He can be a very matured Christian. You see, you must have somebody you say, Father CEO, bro CEO, you discuss these things. If you don't have anybody like that, please, after this session today, begin to think, who can be my spiritual director? Because they will help you sift these things when these challenges come, to make you see if this is an opportunity or if it is an abuse.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Tony.
Yes, I would just like to add something which I actually noted, because sometimes when you look, when we talk about forgiveness and we talk about tolerance, and marriage is sacrificial. Jesus told the men, love your wives just as he loved the church and laid his life. So even the men are called to lay their lives for their wives. And that is a very sacrificial thing to do. And then let's look at the way Christ also looked at us. He looked, you noticed he had a lot of compassion for the weak, the marginalized. You understand? As different from those who were hypocrites, who were deliberate sinners. He rebuked them. He forgave them all right when they appeared, but he also rebuked them very sharply. But you notice that he had a lot of compassion for people who are weak. So sometimes some of these abusers, or maybe not really